Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm Henry Lee Dogman, filling in today for your old pal Bigfoot. Seems Bigfoot is off today to celebrate Frank the cat's birthday. Frank is feeling much better after his recent illness, and today is the day when he turns 15 years old. Frank is a Scary Stories Halloween kind of cat, all black from head to toe. Here's wishing Frank the happiest of cat birthdays. Tonight we have two all-new Scary Dogman stories set in places Frankie isn't allowed to go to. Old abandoned buildings. These are places you should probably avoid too, unless you're an expert, or unless you're a dogman like me. Let's get started with this first one, which we call Dogman in the Abandoned Asylum. Dear Scary Stories NYC, my uncle once took me with him when he was touring an abandoned asylum to possibly rent for a haunted house attraction. We were half expecting to see ghosts there, but neither of us expected to see the Dogman. This story happened when I was a kid, like 15 or 16 years old. My parents were going through troubles, so I got handed off to spend days with my aunts and uncles a lot of the time. This one uncle, let's call him Walter, asked if I would want to go with him to see an abandoned hospital and asylum. I didn't really, but I didn't want to be home either, so I went. Once we got there, the place was sure creepy, and I didn't see how he could possibly make it safe enough to let the public into. His architect was tending to agree with me, but my uncle wanted to tour every inch of this place. He was hoping it would work out because it had the look of a haunted building. It was also close enough to a few cities that it should draw enough of a crowd and be easy enough to get to. Most importantly, though, the price was right. I tagged along with the architect and our guide, and I have to be honest, I wasn't feeling the vibe of a haunted house ride. I was feeling the vibe of a rat-infested, scary old building with a floor that always felt like it was about to give away below you. There were also at least 4 areas where walls had fallen, and the building was too easy to just walk into. They would need to close places off and possibly build new walls or at least support structures. I didn't know anything about architecture then, and I still don't, but it was just clear from looking at things that they were pretty shaky. I'm kind of sure the place was torn down sometime after that, but since I'm not sure exactly where we went, I can't say for sure. This was the early 1970s, and we were probably someplace in New Jersey or maybe Pennsylvania. It was a pretty long drive, but not that long, so that's why I'd guess Jersey or PA. At any rate, both the architect and me voted no on the building before we even left the place. We said goodbye to the guide and the architect. Then my uncle took me to get a burger and a chocolate malted. After dinner, he said he wanted to drive past the old asylum again before he took me home. I was against the idea, as it was already dark out, but he said that was why he wanted to drive by again, to see how it looked at night. I told him he was crazy, but I had no choice except to go along for the ride. Now, of course, since the place was off the beaten path and down at the end of this long driveway, we couldn't just drive past. We drove all the way up to it, and we got out in the early nighttime, maybe 7 or 8 o'clock. The front gate's lock was rusted. There was no security at all anywhere. Graffiti was everywhere. At night, the place had an extra air of threat to it, but not in a fun, scary movie kind of way, in a genuinely threatening way. Some of the graffiti said horrible things, and someone had to have written it there. They probably did it at night. They might be coming back, or they might be there already. That was the way my mind was thinking. I really didn't want to be where we were, but my uncle was oblivious. He told me to wait in the car, but something about that was even more frightening to me than going out to walk around the grounds with him. I'd be trapped there in the car if something happened to my uncle, although being with him when it happened didn't seem to be that much greater an option. We walked around the side toward the back with my uncle's head swerving in different directions. He had a powerful flashlight with him and kept holding it low to the ground, shining it up at things to show me how scary the place would look with some dramatic lighting. I told him it was scary just as it was, and that we should probably leave soon. He ignored me, and when we walked around to the back, he gasped and made various happy noises. All I saw was an overgrown yard. I was thinking there were probably ticks on that tall grass, but my uncle was thinking, haunted graveyard. He started telling me about the fake mausoleums and graves his partner and he had in storage, and how great it would all look in that overgrown yard. At that moment, I noticed something that took all the fun out of the idea of a haunted graveyard to me. I saw some actual graves off by the woods in the distance. I pointed them out to my uncle, and his reaction was the opposite of mine. He ran over to examine them more closely, and I was winded when I finally caught up to him. I was surprised to learn he was in better shape than I was, but I had been overeating with the stress at my home. I think that was the first time I realized I'd gotten overweight and out of shape, so I was a bit preoccupied as my uncle went on and on about these handmade graves. They looked like they had been made by asylum inmates, and the entire scene was kind of sad to me. I asked my uncle to please respect this area, and I walked back toward the car. I was walking slow, though, because I didn't want my uncle to see how winded I had gotten chasing after someone his age. I decided that waiting in the car might be a better idea after all. I heard Uncle Walter call my name from behind, saying that he was going to toss the keys to me so I could listen to the radio in the car while I waited. When I turned around to catch the keys, I saw my uncle, as you would expect, but then, beyond him, further past him, toward the edge of the trees and wooded area, there was another figure. I could only make it out in silhouette, and I wasn't sure if what I was interpreting this to be in my head could be real. The main illumination was my uncle's flashlight, which was constantly in motion, and generally pointed in my direction at that moment in time. So whatever was behind him seemed to shift its shape and shadows each time the flashlight moved, and I was having a hard time being certain what I was seeing back there. Whatever it was, it appeared to be twice as tall in my field of vision as my uncle, being that it also seemed so far behind my uncle. That would mean it was ridiculously taller than he was. So although the dark figure was giving me the heebie-jeebies, I felt certain it must be some extremely strange optical illusion. I pointed over my uncle's head, and he turned to see what I was pointing and looking at, shining his flashlight around until he saw it, the tall figure. For almost a second, he got it fully in his light, and what I saw in that brief glimpse was so unbelievable that I tried desperately to figure out how it could possibly be an illusion, because what I saw was a dog head closing its eyes and turning away from the light, then putting its hairy front arm in front of its face and moving back into the shadow. It was a man-like figure, but it had a dog-like face, and then it was gone. rather than doing what a sane person would do, such as get out of there. My uncle shone his flashlight all around the trees and shouted out things like, "You there! Come out of there!" Like, why did he want that thing to come out? And what was he going to do if it did? And even if he thought it was someone in a costume, why do you want to talk to a guy in a Halloween costume hanging out behind the abandoned asylum? The answer is, you don't want to talk to that guy. But my uncle did, and I was once again forced to trail along after him, begging him to be quiet and please just drive me home. But that is what he eventually agreed to do. As we walked back toward the car, he was strangely silent. I think he had seen something back there that I hadn't seen. He was quieted and humbled, but I'm not sure exactly by what. He probably saw what I had seen, and it probably was not an illusion. It probably really was a dog-headed wild man. As we came around the ruins of the building to where he had parked his car, 3 of the large dark dogmen took off, each running in a somewhat different direction, back into the woods. They had been by his car, and when we reached the vehicle, the smell of it told us what they had been doing. I guess my uncle's car was marked as Dogman turf. Fortunately, it didn't smell as bad inside, and he drove me home. My uncle was whining and complaining, but I was telling him we were lucky they ran off. Can you imagine if they surrounded his car and didn't back off? What would we have done? It's not like we had cell phones in those days. We were in the middle of no place, in the dark of night. It would have taken them weeks to find us. We wouldn't have had a chance. But those dogs ran off when they saw us approaching, and so we lived to tell the tale. Not that either of us actually did tell that tale to too many people. My uncle begged me not to tell my parents what we had seen, or even that he had brought me back there after dark. I made him bribe me. I don't remember what I got out of him. Maybe some comic books that they didn't sell in my town or something. It did take my uncle another year or two, but eventually he was able to start a seasonal haunted house event that lasted over 10 years. Not at that asylum, though. I don't think he ever made too much money off of his haunted house, but he was just a guy who loved Halloween. As for me, I think I got all the Halloween scared right out of me that night that I saw Dogman at the abandoned asylum. We'll be right back with another story of Dogman in abandoned places right after this.
I'm Madeline Starr, and you can join me here each week for Saturday Night Scary Serials. That's when we tell you a new chapter in the ongoing serialized life of Jenny, whose husband Brian turns into a large feral dogman that only she can control. Why is this happening to them? And who are the strange, partially hidden forces that seem to guide them along a path they never chose? Come back every Saturday night as I host another episode of Saturday Night Scary Serials right here on the Scary Stories NYC channel. It all begins August 31st.
Hey there, do you like werewolf stories? Then join me, Nancy Livonian in Hollywood, every week for Werewolf Wednesdays right here on the Scary Stories NYC channel.
I'm PQ Ribber. Join me and Dr. Death for a new cryptid each week on Monday Night Monsters. It all begins August 26th right here on Scary Stories NYC.
Dogman in the abandoned theater. Dear Scary Stories NYC. When I was in my early 20s, I was involved in an underground punk rock scene. We occupied areas of the city which had been left to rot. We lived underground and inside condemned buildings, and we survived cooperatively. There was a condemned movie theater closed off in the front that we had figured out how to get into through the abandoned building next door, and so we set up a punk rock club in there, using electricity someone somehow hooked us up with. I honestly don't know how they did that, and if I did know, I wouldn't admit it. So we actually had some of the top hardcore punk bands play this place. Already at the age of 22 or 23, I was kind of old for that scene, and after they got used to me, the kids used to sarcastically call me Dad. Like, whenever I would give them advice, they would call me Dad and do the opposite of what I had suggested, that sort of thing. But I pitched in a lot to help with the club for one summer, and it kind of became the center of my life for about 2 months that one year. And those are mostly very positive memories. There was one night, though, when I was on cleanup duty after an all-night show, that I encountered something one would never expect to encounter in such an urban environment. I encountered the Dogman. Now, I've described how we would enter the theater through a door we had created from the next building over. We deliberately left the front of the theater facing the street, closed off as it was. We didn't want anyone to notice that the theater was being used. We relied on word of mouth to sell out the shows and took donations from the audience of money or food or drink. When the show was done, people would go next door again, then exit through the rear door that led to the alleyway. They had set up a good system before I got there, and it was incredible to be a part of it. I hear that neighborhood's all gentrified and everything was destroyed years ago, but this was a brief golden age. So, after the audience would leave, when I was on cleanup duty, I would open the back doors of the theater and air the place out. This theater was a mess when we found it, and none of us cared very much about cleanliness, so my job was mainly to sweep out the broken glass or other dangerous or nasty-looking things, and collect any valuables anyone might have dropped. We never really got it much less dusty than it had been when we first occupied it. At any rate, that back door was a big double door, and it led out to a patch of dirt with broken chain link fences around it, falling down. Apparently this was a parking lot in the old days for the theater. No paving, no parking spots marked off, so this must have gone way back. It couldn't have been meant to accommodate more than 10 or 12 cars max, but there it was. So, this night, I opened the doors to let all the musty, smoky, bad breath air out and get some oxygen in there. And I swear, across the way, right by the outer chain link fence, I see this Ray Harryhausen animation kind of thing. It was like something from Greek mythology. It was half man and half animal, and it had a head like a dog. I don't mean it was dressed like an ancient Greek or anything. It was an animal, not a man, but it stood like a man would. The creature caught sight of me and frantically looked around for a way past the chain link fence. I saw as it jumped through a hole in that fence and began running directly toward me. It was the strangest moment of my life. I felt like I was closing the doors to the theater as quickly as I could, and yet at the same time, everything had slowed to infinitely slow motion. I was remembering things very nostalgically that had happened to me all through my life. My family had been difficult when I was a kid, but I remembered all the nice moments. I remembered sunsets. I remembered finding a nickel one time. I remembered friends. At the same time, I was gazing into the eyes of this demonic, pig-eared dog man staring insanely at me and running wildly at me. I did get the doors closed before his arrival, but I did not get them bolted before he threw himself into them. I held them back, and we both pushed back and forth on each other. After a while, I noticed 2 guys were helping me, 2 guys from the scene. Eventually, the pushing on the other side stopped, and I was able to lock that exit. The 2 guys asked me what army we had just been fighting off, and I tried to think of a way to explain it to them. They laughed at my blank expression and dropped the subject. They probably thought it was one of the local gangs and that I didn't want to be a stool pigeon. But in reality, I had never heard of Dogman yet, and I didn't even know how to tell them about what happened. I literally didn't have the words to describe it yet. The day I encountered Dogman at the abandoned theater. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
If you enjoyed this, please click like or consider subscribing. Remember to click the bell icon or you won't get notifications. If you want to listen to Bigfoot's secret uncensored story each Sunday, just go to peterbernard.com and become a paid subscriber. See you tomorrow. Same dog time, same dog channel.
Come back for more scary stories.